Aloha kako, aloha everyone. Good morning. Real quickly, if I can just mention, 1 year ago, if I were sitting in the audience, I would have said, oh, that's Jeff Mukulina. Oh, that's Mark Duda. And there's some of my idols in the renewable industry. As Jeff had mentioned, I worked for Senator Akaka for 11 years prior to joining First Wind in February. So I'm relatively new, and I would be lying if I told you that I had all the answers today. But one thing that I did take from Senator Akaka working with him is that in all of our actions in life, it should start from Yuna'au, here. And that'll dictate all that comes forward here. And so the opening blessing that was given this morning hit it right on the nail as far as how we as a community should see our future. And so what I'm getting at with that is that what is working, we have broad support in this effort at the city, the state, the federal level. The general community, you know, we of course are focused on wind energy, utility scale wind energy as a company, First Wind. But as Jeff mentioned, we work in partnership with all the renewable sectors. We need all aspects of renewable energy in Hawaii to achieve the broader goal of self-sustainability. So what's working? Yes, the incentives are great at the state as far as income tax credit or state tax credits. But the broad support that we have in Hawaii, the robust renewable resources that we have at hand, it's a general calling that has been well received. What's not working, in my humble opinion, we have a regulatory agency, a permitting agency that's under-resourced, and it's no secret. And so as Representative Thielen mentioned, we need to provide that stability going forward in order to bring more renewable resources online more efficiently and in a quicker fashion. Thank you.
Well, thanks also for being here. You know, it's hard to, I'm just going to sort of jump right in. You know, and maybe take it out a little bit larger. The thing that's not, there definitely are some things that are working. I think in general people care about these issues. You know, it's not like you can't have a discussion with someone at whatever level of policy making or even on the street about energy and have it, you know, generate some interest. The incentive structure, as Kekoa said, is great, and that's really supportive. But from where I sit, we have this fundamental problem, which is we have a 19th century regulatory model and a 21st century you know, set of problems and energy economy and set of technologies, and these things are just completely missing each other. We're in this period now where there's a little bit of overlap, and so like some business can continue to happen under that regulatory model, and you see that with First Wind and with the solar industry. But we're like, you know, max 2 years away from that just being over. There's really very, very little compatibility between the economic incentive structure that's embedded in the regulatory system that drives the utilities behavior on one hand, and then on the other side, the public interest, whether that's around economic development or climate change or energy security. And so there's some kind of crisis coming if we don't change the regulatory structure of that we use to procure power and to decide who gets to generate and this type of stuff. So, you know, it's not immediately apparent that things aren't working now. I think there's a lot of really positive rhetoric, and frankly that rhetoric has been helpful in moving the ball incrementally in some of these PUC proceedings. But we're coming to the end of what those types of proceedings in the current framework can actually accomplish. And so, you know, there's lots of things that people are doing that are good things, but it's all going to add up to whittling around the edges unless this thing gets changed fundamentally. And that's going to have to be done over the objections of the utility. That's just the reality of where we are. And until we address that problem, it's going to continue to be incremental change with a, you know, massive level of frustration because the utilities behave exactly the way we incentivize them to behave, and we set them up to do this, and we shouldn't be surprised. And I'm not surprised when they do exactly what you could predict they would do if you looked at the way the thing is set up. So I think that's the issue. And you know, there's other important things that could happen, but that's the main thing that we need to throw our collective weight behind and say, you know, develop a sense of urgency behind and not be content to think that when we see a new wind farm or get a PV system on our house or something in between that things are working and the problem's getting solved. It's like a mirage, and the thing is coming to an end.
Well, I think we're done here.
Yeah. Do I know my audience?
I think we're done.
I'm assuming when Mark throws out some of these acronyms like PUC, everyone's on the same page. Maybe if you're not, just maybe raise your hand. PUC, Public Utilities Commission, this 3-member board that makes all of the regulatory decisions really for governing the monopoly utility. So I don't know. I mean, I think people who are maybe that person on the street you're talking to might be encouraged by something called the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. This initiative that the governor launched with the utility a couple of years back. And that was supposed to drive all this change. I mean, has that not happened? Was it set up to fail? What was the issue?
That's for me.
That's for either of you. And you know, I mean, the governor has 2 days left here. But really, I mean, that was really
sure.
Set up as something that was going to be.
So again, in the same spirit, the Clean Energy Initiative has been useful in getting some framing legislation that makes things less bad than they were relative to our ability to get these things done. It doesn't go anywhere toward fundamentally solving the problem, which is we're not going to have energy security even if it works. We're still going to be unnecessarily exporting, billions of dollars outside the state. We're not going to be aggressively tapping all of the energy sources in the state that we're drowning in. And so, I don't know, I honestly, genuinely don't know if it was an appropriate half measure to get from where we were to get to where we really need to go, or just a, failure to be ambitious enough, or the utility just, stopped it kind of there. But the reality is two things. One of them is it doesn't matter if we achieve that. It helps if we achieve that, but that's not the solution. And we need to, and even if we're not all the way there in 2030, we need to know what the end point is and have a plan where 2030 is a stop along the way. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the energy agreement actually imagines a particular form of this transition from fossil fuels or partial transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and it's mostly based around, again, this 19th century utility model where the utility is still in control. They're procuring power primarily from large-scale renewable energy producers and then kind of reselling it to everybody else. And so, there's absolutely, this gets us the kind of climate change, benefits, carbon reduction and everything else. But what it doesn't do, or what it doesn't take account of, is the fact that you're still going to be paying a lot for your power. You're missing out on all these economic development kind of spillovers that come when a business buys a system and makes its own energy and pays for the thing in 3 or 4 years, and it lasts for 25 years. That's a radically different economic development proposition than buying power from a biofueled plant from the utility for the same 25 years, where you're trying to manage your operating costs and it goes up and up and up. So I don't think that the energy agreement took any account of this, and if you think that the state's role is to kind of guard the public interest as far as these things go, they missed a huge chunk. And you can't get there only with distributed generation, or the type of generation on homes and businesses, but the plan, you can read through the thing, and it's not a plan for kind of maximizing that and then blending that with these other things. It's a, kind of a utility-centric thing, and you can literally see this. I remember this so vividly from the press conference, and it's like this is total blue sky thinking. We're starting from scratch. We only assumed one thing, or two things, and I forget what one of them was, but the other one was a vertically integrated utility. And so it's like, well, you've assumed everything. So that's the reality, and it's definitely been helpful, and we've talked a lot about this stuff. We've initiated a lot of proceedings, and it's been a great thing to be able to cite from in making arguments at the commission and at the legislature, but it's fundamentally flawed in that it's not taking us all the way where we need to go.
Kekoa, would you agree with that characterization, or?
Absolutely. I mean, just to harp on that, we have a utility that basically has a monopoly on no matter how much we might bring on, their business incentives, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. That's based upon, frankly, fossil fuels. And so until we change that incentive to provide them with a benefit that's linked directly to the objectives that we have with the Clean Energy Initiative, that's the only way we're going to be able to change anything. So I second that.
As a segue, we have a new governor coming in on Monday morning. What would you say to Governor-elect Abercrombie if he really wanted to transform Hawaii's energy future?
Sure. I mean,
in 30 seconds or less.
Yeah. I mean, the exact right answer to that gets into things that are, I think, very deep into the regulatory or electricity markets and regulatory economics. And so, like, the questions that people in this industry ask themselves are like, how deregulated can you be given the size of this market, and what roles do do you still need a monopoly provider for, and which ones can you, take to market? And in other jurisdictions, the transmission, the sort of high voltage wires business is its own business that's open to competition. I think that's pretty unlikely to succeed here. You'd have to imagine a world in which there's lots and lots of competing providers for to owning transmission and building their own transmission and being responsible for it and being regulated to be responsible for it. That's probably difficult. And so, I think what you get into, where you get when you start thinking about this is, okay, we have a vertically integrated monopoly, that's bad, and we're too small of a market for full-on deregulation. And so you need to kind of land somewhere in between. And so what are the key leverage points? Well, what you have to do is eliminate the utility's ability to control what types of generation get onto the grid, because they're going to use it to ensure that their generation gets on the grid in the world that we have now, where they do lots of generation. And so that decision-making authority has to be taken away from them and lodged somewhere else. And then there's a bunch of other kind of rules that go with it. And then you can sort of neutrally and objectively set up rules that will encourage if this is the policy goal, encourage the maximum adoption of renewable energy possible. And that sentence applies a bunch of kind of technical and engineering constraints. So that doesn't mean that you can only have a bunch of wind or a bunch of solar or only wind and solar. It doesn't work like that. But still, we don't have a system that's set up to kind of aggressively go after that. And that's what so that's the change that's needed, is some form of not deregulation but re-regulation, so that you change the role of the utility, you change the role of the independent power producers, and in a lot of cases you're encouraging more competition and letting more generation onto the grid.
What is the role for folks who are fired up, excited about clean energy, and they want to come down here in January and make things happen? I mean, where aside from following Robert's website and submitting testimony on key bills, I mean, what other role can folks play to really affect change?
Yeah, I think for us, this re-regulation thing, it isn't of any particular benefit to the direct benefit to the solar industry or the wind industry, but it's going to create a system in which these things can sort of optimally evolve and whatever it is, compete and grow and everything else. And so I think that on the renewable energy side, you have the framework, the context for like a vast, broad coalition, and I'm worried about a bunch of other things that in comparison are little, that matter to the solar industry or matter to the renewable energy industry. So I don't know that this is the right answer, Rob, but I would consider thinking real hard, assuming that if the package that is trying to implement the Energy Authority comes from Abercrombie and you guys like what it's in, is just don't even worry about anything else in energy this year and say we got to get this, or the rest of these things. We're not nibbling around the edge anymore, and there's a lot between here and making that decision that just isn't known yet. But I think you could, in a certain future view of the world here 6 weeks from now, look at this thing and say, that's how we're going to play this, and this is what really matters. And if the net metering system size cap, which is ridiculously set at 100 kilowatts, stays there for another year, that's not nearly as important, as trying to get this thing fundamentally changed. And so I think that's, if it were the case that you guys come out like that, and that you want to do that, then just having lots of people all the time talking to their representatives, repeatedly over and over and coming down. It's like there's a mass of popular support for this change. We're sick of living in this 19th century thing. We're getting to the point where they've literally already told people they can't put PV systems on their house, and it's not because we're at some kind of technical limit. It's just because the rules let them, and so they're using the rules to stop them. So anyway, there's, I think.
So to paraphrase, I'm thinking you're saying focus on one thing, whatever this one thing is.
So I'm saying, well, not unless it's this thing.
Okay.
But I wouldn't make that statement about anything else that I see coming up. Of course you want to focus your efforts for sure, but I'm not saying focus on one single thing unless it's this thing, because this thing is that fundamental.
Yeah.